welcome members of Planning and Development Committee to the meeting of Monday, April 8th. Everyone is present today. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. Members of the committee, there were no changes to today's agenda except, I believe, correspondence, which you have in front of you for item 4.3. Are there any additions, changes, or deletions to the agenda? No. May I have a motion to approve today's agenda as is? Councillor Williams, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest under Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda. No. Thank you. The city clerk will note for meeting minutes. Consent agenda. Right now we have item 7.2 in consent. The items listed with an asterisk on the agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial. The consent motion is to adopt this matter on today's agenda without the need for a separate discussion on this item. Do any members wish to add an item or remove an item from the consent agenda on the agenda? And I believe Councillor Bowman is on the board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, if there's nobody here for report 7.3, which is the Palladium sign amendment, I would like to move that to consent.
So, suggested by Councillor Bowman, are there anyone here today to speak to item 7.3 regarding Palladium? Going once, twice, three. Okay, so item 7.3 has been moved in consent. No further. Councillor Dillon. Yes, Councillor Dillon.
Sorry, I'd like to move if nobody's here for the Bramley Road one, having technical difficulties. Bramley Road, Robertson. I'd like to move that into consent.
Which one? Is that item 4.3?
Yeah.
I just want to get clarification. Are you asking for that one?
Yeah.
No, that's a statutory public meeting,
Can't
so.
do that.
So is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So as of, we have 7.2 and 7.3 in consent. Can I get a motion to move consent agenda? Councillor Bowman, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. We will start our statutory public meeting reports. Again, just to remind everyone in the audience, this is a public meeting of the Planning Development Committee held in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act of Ontario. The proposals to be heard at this public meeting are the result of applications made under the Planning Act. These are not proposals of the City of Brampton unless they are specifically identified as city-initiated proposals. This evening we have two proposals, item 4.1 and item 4.2, that are city-initiated proposals. The intent of this public meeting is to hear submissions from the applicant and public regarding these proposals. Members of the committee may ask questions for clarification, but will not engage in debate on the proposal at this time. Committee consideration of the proposal will occur at a future meeting when planning staff bring forward the final recommendation report on each proposal. The city has also posted to its website, brampton.ca, supporting information documentation for all these current development applications for public review and reference. We will now proceed to consider the item on this evening's statutory public meeting agenda. A report from city staff, Mr. LaRota, a policy planner from the Planning Development Services, regarding site-specific city-initiated draft official plan amendment to the newly implemented Highway 410 and Steeles Secondary Plan Area 5, Wards 3 and 7. Mr. LaRota. Mrs. LaRota, my apologies.
Good evening, members of the committee, members of the public. My name is Claudia LaRota. I'm a policy planner with the city. This evening, I'm presenting city-initiated site-specific amendments to the Highway 410 and Steeles Secondary Plan. Specifically, the amendments that are being proposed are for properties located on the south side of Steeles Avenue between Kennedy Road and the Highway 410, within, as I said, the Highway 410 and Steeles secondary plan. Just to provide a little bit of background information, the secondary plan review was initiated to consolidate some of the older secondary plans, to update some of the policies and the existing mapping. Previously, we had 54 secondary plans, some of them dated back to the 1970s. The purpose of the review was to bring those plans into conformity with the 2006 official plan. As part of the first phase of the secondary plan review on September 12th of last year, 5 new secondary plans were adopted to consolidate 18 of those existing older secondary plans. It's important to note that these secondary plans were the ones that are largely built out. The ones that are within the greenfield areas were not part of this exercise. One of the goals of the policy review was to remove site-specific policies that were very detailed, specifically for properties that were already zoned and that had been developed in accordance with existing policies. The Highway 410 and Steeles secondary plan, however, was appealed by First Gulf for the properties located on the south side of Steeles between Kennedy and Road. It is the intention of First Gulf to maintain those site-specific policies that apply to those properties prior to the adoption of the Highway 410 and Steeles secondary plan. The city-initiated amendments that are being presented this evening propose to reinstate all those policies that existed for those specific properties as part of a city-initiated amendment. Those policies will be reinstated through site-specific policies for those properties. Because you can't see my clear, but they will be reinstating those policies as part of new amendments to the secondary plan. The proposed official plan amendments that are being presented conform to the 2017 growth plan, the region official plan, and the city's official plan. Following the circulation of the amendments that are being proposed this evening, staff will prepare a recommendation report with an official plan amendment to adopt the amendments before the summer of this year. It is important to note that there are still additional corrective changes that are required for 5 of the secondary plans that were adopted in September. Those will be brought forward to a public meeting probably by the end of before the end of the summer of this year. Again, the report that was being discussed today and this presentation will be posted online, and that's my contact information if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from members of committee? No. Can I get a motion to move to accept the staff, receive the staff for a presentation? Moved by Councillor Vicente. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We now go on to item 4.2. Mr. Vanderberg, please. Oh, Councillor Pelletier, sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we changed the procedure in the way we do planning meetings? I don't know with that new legislation that came forward. Usually we ask if there's any members, these are public meetings, right? So we ask if there's any members of the public that like to hear the a presentation. And then if there aren't, then, because it's not for us. It's
That's
not
fine.
for members of council, right?
Okay, thank you for the reminder. So you're saying that regarding 4.2?
I'm just asking
Regarding 4.1?
for all the public meeting portions.
Okay. Well, as I see, so regarding 4.1, are there any folks in the audience who would like to ask any questions regarding item 4.1? Okay, no. Now regarding 4.2, would anyone like to see a presentation regarding item 4.2? Okay, we have Sylvia. Yes, Mr. Vandenberg.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the public. My name is David Vandenberg, and I am the planner working on the city-initiated proposal to amend the zoning bylaw. The purpose of this public meeting is to provide information to the public on it and seek feedback on the proposal. The proposal is for a zoning bylaw amendment that would extend an existing provision in the zoning bylaw that exempts commercial uses in the downtown from having to meet the minimum parking requirements in the zoning bylaw. It applies to the historic downtown core as shown on the slide on the screen. This map shows the exemption area in more detail. The exemption area is centered on Main and Queen Street, and to the north it extends to approximately Church Street, the CN rail line to the east, Wellington to the south, and Mill Street to the west. Now I'll go into a little bit more detail about the proposed amendment. The zoning bylaw sets minimum parking requirements for the number of parking spaces that a use has to provide on site. The proposed amendment exempts commercial uses in the downtown from these minimum parking requirements, so they do not have to provide any parking. I would note that this is not a new provision. There has been a series of exemptions for temporary periods that have been in place for it since 1995. The exemption has been extended a number of times since then, and the most recent extension expires on June 30 of this year. The proposed amendment would extend it to 2024. By way of a little bit more background on it, the boundaries of the exemption area were set to incorporate all the commercially zoned lands in the downtown that are within walking distance of municipal parking garages. It is really those parking garages that allow the city to provide this exemption. Without the exemption, new commercial development and some change of uses within existing buildings would be required to provide parking on site or pay cash in lieu of parking. The change of use within a building is the most common scenario where the exemption is applicable. The zoning bylaw sets different parking rates for different uses. So for example, a restaurant has to provide more parking than a retail store. And when a store is replaced in the downtown, say by a restaurant, they would have to provide parking on site, which is often impossible in the downtown because there's no room on site. The parking exemption removes this barrier for commercial development. It also encourages the desired compact built form in the historic downtown. I would note that the question of making the exemption permanent will be addressed in the ongoing comprehensive zoning bylaw review. As far as where we are in the process, the next steps are that following this meeting, staff will collect and review the public and other comments on the app proposal. And then staff will advance a final recommendation report to the planning committee for a decision, which would be intended to do before the exemption expires in June. Any issues raised will be addressed in the recommendation report. Staff will contact and follow up with anyone who may have spoken, written in, or advised of an interest in monitoring this proposal. The report associated with tonight's meeting is available online at the city's website as well, and the presentation will be available there shortly. The final recommendation report will also be posted on the city's website approximately a week in advance of the future meeting. Anyone who provides comments will be notified on the intended schedule of the meeting. Again, my name is David Vandenberg, and my contact information is posted on the screen if you wish to provide comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any members, or are there any folks in the council that would, in chambers, would like to come forth and provide public input? Please come forth and sign up with our staff, and please say your name for our record. Do we require an address? We don't require an address, do we? Oh, okay. After's fine, that's fine.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I'm a resident of Ward 3. So I'm curious why the city has been extending a series of temporary exemptions given that it started in 95 for literally decades. Doesn't decades seem like if we're doing it this way, it's effectively permanent? So why haven't there been moves to make it officially permanent earlier? Why is it specifically only for commercial? when adding residential downtown without having to provide parking would make it easier to satisfy those requirements and help revitalize downtown.
Thank you.
Through Mr. Chairman, in response to the question about making it permanent, we did have some discussion with our public works staff on that. And there was some concerns about the capacity in the garages, things which in municipal parking garages, and if, while there is capacity now, if in the future, if things change, there could be, they want to retain that flexibility to review the exemption at that period. I would note that we're doing a comprehensive update to the zoning bylaw, and we will be looking at making it permanent as part of that exemption, or that process. So that is something that we will be looking at. As far as the residential uses, there is a reduced rate for residential uses in the downtown core. So it is reduced to 1 space per unit, which is a significant reduction from the rate that applies elsewhere in the city. And then typically through any development application that comes through, if there is if a further reduction is sought, there would be review through that application process.
There was a project north of the tracks where I believe the site's called Forest Garage. In terms of heritage designation, that has 645 parking spots and 590 units. And it looked like staff was trying to say, well, we've got bike parking, so we're not gonna need as much parking. We think we can make it work under there. If it's only 1 per unit, why was staff looking for excuses to come up with, well, 645 for 590s should be enough?
Yeah, any-
I can always get that later in a report.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'm sorry, just, could you maybe reframe the question just for clarity on what it is?
So it's, if there's a reduced rate at 1 spot per unit, why is there a site that's in there just north of Main Street and the rail crossing, which looks like it's still within the limits? Why was 645 looked at as a reduced rate if 645 is more than 590, which would be 1 per unit?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So I believe the site that this gentleman's speaking to is the development application that's just at the corner of Main and Nelson. So staff, as you may be aware, are working towards a recommendation report for that proposal. We'll be putting through to committee and council our recommendations on it. Really at this point in time, we're evaluating the applicant's proposal. The applicant has made a particular submission with respect to the number of parking spaces that are proposed and such. So council committee also will have staff's recommendations within the next couple of meetings.
Thank you. Do members of committee have any questions? No. So can I get a motion to receive staff report? Moved by Councillor Palashi. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Items now 4.3. Are there any folks in the audience who would like to hear presentation 4.3? Oh, the item is regarding application to amend the official plan zoning bylaw to permit residential townhouse development consisting of 8 townhouse units. 10196 Bramley Road, west of Bramley Road, north of Peter Robertson Boulevard, Ward 9. So there is, so I would invite, they would like to hear a presentation by Ms. Shell. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and the public. My name is Ying Xiao. I'm the development planner assigned to process and review this application in support of a townhouse development submitted by GWD Limited. So the subject property is located at 10196 Bramley Road, on the west side of the Bramley Road, north of Peter Robertson Boulevard. The nearest major intersection is Bramley Road and Bouvier Drive East. So a little bit of a background. The property is adjacent to a city-owned woodlot known as Springdale Forest. Prior to 2007, the property included mature trees with approximately 70% canopy cover, as well as a single detached dwelling. In April 2007, the house was demolished and the majority of the trees on the property was removed without obtaining a tree cutting permit from the city, violating the city's woodlot bylaw. A trial was held in 2008 to deal with the unauthorized removal of trees. The property owner was convicted and was required to pay a fine to the city. So the two aerial photos show the subject site before and after the tree removal. As you can see from the images, the site had a significant vegetation coverage in 2006, and currently most of the trees have been cleared. The 2004 property survey shows a dwelling and a shed located near the northern property line, and the structures were demolished in 2007. The applicant is proposing a residential townhouse development that consists of 8 or 9 townhouse units. So to implement this change in land use, the applicant is proposing an official plan amendment from open space to residential in Schedule A and from open space to communities in Schedule 1. A secondary plan amendment from natural heritage system to medium density residential. And a zoning bylaw amendment from agricultural to residential townhouse C and open space. And at this point, city planning staff have deemed this application complete, circulated the submission to city departments and external commenting agencies, and provided the public meeting notice to all property owners within 240 meters of the site. The site is adjacent to a city-owned woodlot, Springdale Forest to the south and to the west. Immediately to the north of the site is a low-density residential neighborhood. Across Bromley Road from the site is also low-density residential housing. Brampton Civic Hospital is in close proximity. So the following perspective view shows the surrounding woodlot and the residential developments in this area. The applicant is proposing to develop a total of 8 or 9 three-story townhouse units in 2 blocks. Each townhouse unit will have a minimum frontage of 4.5 meters and 2 parking spaces. A private condominium road will provide access from Bramley Road. A 15-meter environmental buffer and restoration zone adjacent to Springdale Forest will be dedicated to the city. The restoration zone includes walking trails to be used by local residents. The colored site plan demonstrates the limits of the access road, the townhouse units, and the environmental restoration area. Perspective drawings were submitted and showing the rendering of the 2 townhouse blocks. As part of the land use planning review process, the proposal will be evaluated for consistency with the provincial, regional, and municipal planning policies and regulations, including the Planning Act, Provincial Policy Statement, Growth Plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, regional and city official plans, and the city zoning bylaw. So the property is designated open space in Schedule A. general land use designations in the city's official plan. The applicant is proposing to redesignate portions of the subject land from open space to residential. The land within environmental buffer area will remain the open space designation. The property is designated open space in Schedule 1, city concept in the official plan. The applicant is proposing to redesignate portions of the subject land from open space to communities. The land within the environmental buffer will remain the open space designation. The property is also designated woodland in Schedule D, natural heritage features and areas. So no change to Schedule D is being proposed. So staff are evaluating the proposal's consistency with the official plan policies under Section 4.6.6, Natural Heritage System. The policies recognize the importance of the natural heritage system and require the protection, enhancement, and restoration of the natural heritage features within the city. The subject lands are designated Natural Heritage System in Secondary Plan Area 2, Springdale. The secondary plan policies require that lands designated Natural Heritage System be developed in accordance with Section 4.6 of the official plan. An amendment to the secondary plan is proposed to redesignate a portion of the property to medium-density residential. Amendment to the Planning Act introduced by Bill 139 provides that no person shall request an amendment to a secondary plan during the 2-year period following the adoption of a secondary plan, unless the council approves an exception. So the subject property is located within the Springdale secondary plan, which was recently adopted in 2018. So the proposed amendment to the secondary plan therefore requires an exception to be adopted by the council. The property is zoned agricultural by the city's zoning bylaw. Amendment to the zoning bylaw is required to facilitate the townhouse development. It is proposed that portions of the subject lands be rezoned from agricultural to residential townhouse C and open space. So at this time, staff have concerns with regard to the loss of natural heritage features and areas due to the unauthorized tree clearing on the subject site, and are evaluating the proposal's compliance with the policies relevant to natural heritage features as set out in the city's official plan. In particular, Section 4.6.6.13 states that on land subject to a development application where any natural feature or area designated on Schedule D is damaged, destroyed, or removed, there will be no adjustment to the boundary or redesignation of these features or areas in the official plan. So staff have invited any submission from the applicant to address the policy challenges as related to this proposal. So whether the intent and purpose of the official plan policies can be fulfilled is subject to future review. So at this time, several technical considerations associated with this application have been identified. So first, the applicant needs to clarify whether a 9th unit is being proposed within Building B. So staff have concerns about the potential 9th unit that encroaches into the environmental buffer. Second, additional information is required to evaluate the site access design and operation. A traffic impact study is required to provide such information. Third, The proposed walking trails may have an impact on the restoration efforts within the environmental buffer, and an alternative trail design may be required. Fourth, the proposed unit width and rear yard depths may be deficient according to the city's transit supportive townhouse design guidelines. The applicant is advised to work with the urban design staff to come up with an appropriate design for the townhouse units. So the next steps in the applications are staff will continue to review the application, including review comments from the public and from the technical reviewers. A final recommendation report will be forwarded to the Planning and Development Committee. All issues identified by internal and external departments and agencies, and any comments submitted by the public will be discussed in the recommendation report. So staff will contact and follow up with those residents who have spoken, written in, or advised of an interest in monitoring this proposal. As previously mentioned, staff will continue to review this proposal for the consistency with the provincial policy statement and its conformity with provincial policies and regional and city official plans. So the report associated with tonight's meeting will be posted online, and the PowerPoint presentation will be available shortly. So should you have any questions or require any further clarification, please feel free to contact myself or the applicant's planning consultant. And the applicant's planning consultant is also here tonight to answer any questions if needed. And I'm not sure if he has anything to add to this presentation, and we can invite him to the stand.
Thank you. Does the applicant or representative wish to make a submission to committee on this proposal?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, city staff, members of the public. My name is Mark Denardis. I'm a planning associate from Gagnon Walker Domes Urban Planners. Our office is the authorized agent of the property owners in connection with the development proposal on the property. I want to thank Ms. Zhao for her presentation, and I just only want to offer a few comments. 12 years have passed since the site disturbance occurred, and the owners who are present here this evening recognize that they made an error. I wish to also confirm that our office was not engaged on the file at the time of the disturbance, nor any other members on the sub-consultant team. The owners now wish to redevelop the property in the form of a modest infill project. One of the key components to the proposal is the 15-meter restoration zone. I'm not sure if I can flip back to that. Try. This landscape plan, although it's conceptual, shows how it can accomplish this in this 15 meters, which was staked by the Conservation Authority back in, I think it was 2016. The work's to be completed by the owner at the time of construction, and then ultimately it would be deeded over to the municipality. In total, about 53% of the property would be dedicated to the city of Brampton. Unfortunately, we all can't go back in time, and so the damage was done and the disturbance took place. But this application does provide an opportunity to restore and regenerate the property while providing a mix and range of housing, albeit in a very modest form. We look forward to continuing to work with the city staff and the authorities and moving this application forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there anyone who from the audience would like to ask for a question of clarification or make a comment? Please come forth. If you do not do it tonight, you always have the opportunity to write in and provide your opinion. Is there someone who would like to come?
into it, just come down. Come on.
Well, again, if you don't feel comfortable, you can always write and provide your comments to our staff or to the representative of the applicant. Okay? Okay, great. So there's no further comments. Can I get a motion? Oh, sorry, Councillor Dillon, my apologies.
Hi, just a question of clarification. The 15-meter buffer, what is the rationale behind it being 15?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that the 15-meter buffer as proposed, may have been identified through some previous conversation with environmental staff. Beyond that, I can't really confirm at this point in time.
Is it an arbitrary number that's been come up with, or is it a scientific evidence-based decision that it should be 15?
Through you, Chair, I would ask perhaps that the applicant identify just the rationale behind the proposal as proposed with the 15 meters.
Or could it be less, is what I'm saying, or more?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that 15 meters was determined by the city's own consultant. So shortly after the disturbance occurred, the city actually retained their own arborist, who we actually do a lot of work with. But on this side, he was representing the city. So he assessed the damage that was done not only on the property, but also the abutting forest, being Springdale Forest. His conclusions were that 15 meters would be appropriate as a restoration area to restore what was lost. Whether that number can be reduced to, say, 12 or 10, I don't know. That was something that would have to be, I guess, explored with not only the city, but also with the Conservation Authority and the Region Appeal. But I believe when we did the staking, 15 meters was more or less, a general understanding as a starting point. We'll have to see through the processing of the application, but the genesis of that 15 meters came through the woodlot impact study that was done or commissioned by the municipality.
Right, does the applicant, has the applicant, or you guys, also had a study done or had an arborist take a look at it?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, we did actually have our own arborist and ecologist prepare an arborist report and environmental impact study. Those were both submitted in support of the application. When preparing those studies, they did look at the original woodlot impact study, and also our landscape architect looked at the recommendations and was able to generate the plan that's on the screen. So 15 meters was a starting point. Whether it gets reduced, I don't know yet.
Well, what did you guys come up with a number as well?
What we did is, prior to filing the application, we did explore a number of different concepts and layouts. Still very much a townhouse project, but different configurations. You have to remember when you're doing an infill project like this, there's a lot of different items you have to balance. So it's laneways, it's visitor parking, it's unit widths, it's truck turning movements. We found that whether it's 10 meters or 15 meters, you end up with the same result. The 9th unit, which is dashed on the screen there, was shown because the unit kind of straddles that 15 meters. So it's right in the middle. It remains to be a negotiating piece as to whether that 9th unit can be achieved or whether it's got to be, that is a firm line.
So you said, what is involved with the 9th unit being achieved?
Right now, it's straddling that 15-meter buffer. So the unit's actually situated right in the middle.
So, but would you ask to amend that 15-meter buffer at that one point?
So, Councillor Dillon, we should not be.
No, I'm trying to get an idea. They're saying 9 or 8, so I'm wondering what their ask is.
Our ask right now is 8. We'd be open, obviously, to whether we could achieve 9, but I think a lot of different things need to be balanced out, and we have to hear back from the municipality and the authorities as to whether they feel this is good planning, and if they are of the opinion that a ninth unit could be achieved here, then I think we would probably amend the plan, but we're still very early in the process.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Would you like to move the presentations and staff report? Moved by Councillor Dillon, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now we go to item 4.4. Is there anyone who would like to hear a presentation regarding application to amend the official plan zoning bylaw regarding 8175 Winston Churchill Boulevard regarding Maple Lodge Farms Limited? No. Does the city wish to make a submission to committee? No. Okay, so no one from the applicant or representative. So let the record show that the applicant also or representative is not. Oh, yes, you would like to make a submission? Please come forward. Okay, yeah. Doesn't have to, it's up to you.
So hello again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, my name is Mark Denardis. I'm a planner from Gagnon Walker Domes Urban Planners. Our office is the authorized agent of Maple Lodge Farms, Ltd. We've acted as their land use planner since about 2013 in connection with their 600 acres of land in southwest Brampton and their 300 acres of land in southeast Halton Hills. I wish to thank Mr. Nicky Fortune for his assistance to date in processing the application. Just a few comments to make. At any given time, Maple Lodge Farms employs about 1,600 to 1,800 individuals at its main plant on Winston Churchill Boulevard. It's one of the largest independently owned poultry processors in Canada. The city's economic development office ranks Maple Lodge Farms number 2 in manufacturing and number 4 in top employers. The chicken shop and factory outlet has been a long-standing project of theirs dating back to about 2011. The current facility on Winston Churchill Boulevard employs about 65 staff, and the new facility is projected to double its employees to about 130. There's also their special events team, which attends about approximately 300 events across the province. The storage building is to be dedicated solely for their fleet, and it's not to be used for truck repair. In brief, the proposal is a logical extension of their main plant. It will help regenerate the property, maintain and generate jobs. It's consistent with modern day retailing, and we look forward to continuing to work with city staff and the authorities moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no questions or comments, so can I get a motion by Councillor Willens, moving staff report and presentation? Oh, is there any members of the public that would like to speak regarding this item? No. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Willens to approve and staff report and receive the delegation. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 5.2, delegation from Mr. Neil Davis regarding the extension of Brampton Auto Mall. I'll just ask we wait a couple minutes as people leave the chambers. Are you leaving? No, Mr. Davis, you can come. It's just maybe hold on so as these. Oh, okay. That's no problem. Okay, feel free, Mr. Davis, when you'd like.
We'll do this one. Yeah, in a minute.
You just have to raise the overhead. I take it this is it, or is it all electronic now?
Our city clerk will.
Can we? Yeah, not yet. Just can you turn it on so that I could put various, I guess, sketches, drawings on it?
creaking, but yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I've used up 4 of my 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of committee. I am here on behalf of 2 numbered companies that are controlled by a company called Auto World Import Networks, who own and operate approximately 40 dealerships across the country, most of which are centered in Ontario. And they own the 2 blocks that you see up on the screen there. They're roughly 5 acres, just under 5 acres each. And as you can see, they're surrounded on 3 sides by Dixie Road, Inspire Boulevard, and Ace Drive. And what I'm requesting of the committee, and I understand this is not a usual process, but I will explain why it's not a usual process, is that we get some indication in principle from the committee as to the willingness to look at the underlying land use being changed to permit an expansion of the auto mall onto these lands. And I'd like to talk about the background to the request, if I could, and if we could put up the next. The original thinking of when the special policy areas were introduced for the lands was to put an auto mall within the area that is designated in the purple line. And there are lots of good reasons for that thinking, done in other places, very successful. And it offered, in this city at least, the opportunity to move dealerships that were in locations where we wanted higher order use, particularly along Queen Street, to find a place to relocate. And in a location where the clustering was of an advantage to them. So quite frankly, the visioning for an auto mall was in perfect keeping with what the market was demanding and what we wanted as a city. The difficulty has been that we underestimated the demand from the marketplace of what the community was looking for. And so you see up there arrows, and I just want to take you quickly. That is showing where automotive uses have been permitted through variance applications already. And so if you look at, it's not showing, but the above Dockstetter and just on the west side of Dixie is Block 6. Block 7 is beside it. Those are both approved with staff support for a use that was not permitted in the zoning bylaw and to be permitted on these lands. And then immediately adjacent to the parcels we're talking about, blocks 8 and 9, again, staff supported those in front of the committee. The committee approved it, both those applications. They were made as separate applications. They're separate owners. And then finally, it's called Block 2, which is the piece down right beneath the purple auto mall that was originally designated. Again, an application was made by the owner of those lands through the Committee of Adjustment, and staff supported the application. The committee approved it. In our circumstance, automotive uses, they made an application through the Committee of Adjustment. The Committee of Adjustment approved the application. Staff recommended, staff did not support the application of the committee. Staff recommended the council appeal. Council did appeal. The previous council did appeal the matter, and our client did not appear at the tribunal, but the matter was allowed, and the appeal was allowed. Let me give you the thinking behind that. Staff were faced with a special policy area called Special Policy Area 4 on those lands. that specifically excluded as a permitted use, not just wasn't allowed because it wasn't named, but it specifically excluded automotive uses on these lands. And I think there was a vision for how these, and there was a list of commercial uses sort of permitted for the lands. But I will say that when staff supported all of the other applications, and I'll just read from one report, I'm not going to read from all 6, but essentially it was this, that the proposed motor vehicle sales, leasing, and rental establishment and associated motor vehicle repair and body shop is considered more in keeping and compatible with the industrial zoning and the permitted non-industrial uses of the zone, because these were industrial designated and zoned lands and permitted for commercial uses. And staff said, yes, it's more appropriate. And under the test of desirable and appropriate, they said the subject property is located on the east side of Ace Drive. And I'm talking about Block 8 now, which is the one right on Ace Drive, just immediately north of the two pieces we're talking about. And it said it is directly across the street from an auto mall comprising of various automotive dealerships. For all intents and purposes, the proposal is a logical extension to the auto mall and is desirable for the appropriate development of the land. It goes on to say that they are commonly found in employment districts and are compatible with industrial development. It is a pragmatic expansion to the existing auto mall on the west side of Ace Drive, and so they recommended approval. So that was a thinking, honestly, in all of it. It hit an issue because we had this special policy area 4 that was put in place in 2011. And what I'm going to say is I think...
Sorry, Mr. Davis, just because we passed 5 minutes, I just need a motion to extend your time.
Okay, thank
so
you.
Moved.
Thank you very much. So essentially, I think the vision that staff saw at the time in 2011 for for special policy area 4 is really something that is not a vision that is meeting the market needs of today any longer. And if you follow the blue line, which is sort of our expected, our preferred drawing for an expanded auto mall, it just sort of fits perfectly to complete it. I mean, you're coming up Dixie Road and you'd look in the backside of the automotive dealerships. Why would you not create a gateway at Dixie Road and say, announce for those coming up? It's here because everything else is an automotive dealership to the north and to the west of that. And and when that special policy area was put in place, I don't think there was a thought that the auto mall would turn into what it's turned into. I think there was just not the expectation, but that's changed, and the demand is there. And so you've got sort of 2 choices to make. You could say, no, we're going to follow how staff has thought about this and hang on to the special policy area, a vision that I think is past its day. But if you do that, we've had since 2011 an opportunity for these uses to be taken up, and they haven't been. It's remained vacant. Expectation is I think it would continue. And if we say no, these automotive uses, and we have many interested folks who want to come onto this property, they're either going to find another location in Brampton in a place we don't want them, or more likely, quite frankly, is there because the people who manufacture the cars are landing these dealerships, and they're landing them quickly, quite frankly. And if we say no, or if we say we can't say yes for a year, then these the manufacturers say to the dealers, find me another place, or I'm going to find somebody else to land it for me. And so the jobs and the employment will go someplace else. That investment will go someplace else. Because they are going to land these dealerships. It just won't be here. Now, what if you say yes instead? And I won't, the client's got a long history in this business. They're very successful at it. But I think it is a logical completion to go down to a road instead of mid-block in terms of stopping where the automotive uses would go. Because clearly, why would you not use the opportunity for all of that to cluster around the outside edge and protect the view from the roads by having the buildings protect the inventory of the automotive dealerships and do it all around the block. You'll have an investment of more than $50 million in this property, and as we've seen for 7 years, there's been no investment in this property. Will create several hundred jobs, more jobs, and I'll tell you, the staff required on the other minor variance applications that there, in a couple of cases, be an employment analysis of what the underlying industrial uses would bring for jobs versus the automotive dealers. And the automotive dealership use brought more jobs. So it is certainly likely. My argument would be you're not getting any jobs if you because the uses just aren't being taken up, at least presently. So if you're trying to create jobs, you're going to create more jobs than you will with the underlying uses already permitted on the site. The concern was that, you know, how does it fit with the residential, because that was in part the policy of the secondary plan. How does it fit with the residential to the east? Honestly, it's a pretty big divide, Dixie Road. When the minor variance application came forward for these lands, there wasn't one person who came out and objected from the residential area. And I think that you can make this a gateway corner, much more so with this kind of use than with a number. I mean, there's a laundromat distribution center permitted on the lands. There are a whole bunch of uses that honestly would not be gateway kinds of uses for this piece of property. And you can do a better job. And we are happy to submit to a process of high urban design expectation. And you should for everybody in the auto mall. And you've seen some of them going up. They're really quite spectacular buildings and good investment. So what I'm looking for today is an indication that you find favor with the boundary we're now drawing for the auto mall. We'll make the applications quickly, and there'll be an expedited process to get it back here so we don't lose the opportunity to land these folks here.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I have two members on the board. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the presentation today. Thank you for coming. You know, as the local councillor, you know, Councillor Singh was not here. Councillor Spoveri was here as the regional councillor the last term, and this is a file that we paid close attention to. We were in favor of. I think the key word you used is logical. You had the auto mall that was there. It's expanding. The Committee of Adjustment has approved the lands to the south and to the west of it, and I think it's only logical that it continues down. I know there were some issues that were raised for Inspire Boulevard that on the east, sorry, did I say west side? I meant east side. On the east side, Inspire Boulevard, there's some mom and pop shop types. And I think that if there was, my opinion is that if where the location is, the lands are, where the potential auto mall, sorry, the lands that you guys have, I think that could add to those shops in terms of employees and customers coming over and crossing over and using that. And so I was of the opinion, even last year when this issue was raised, that I think there was a design flaw on the east side. And so this has expanded a great deal. I think what we can do is position ourselves in the GTA and Ontario as being the spot to come to in terms of buying a car, the higher end cars. And so I'm going to let, sorry, just to add another point as well. For commercial, if you take a look down to Bramalea, we already have a grocery store which many people use. If you go south, we have the Trinity Common Mall as well. And so I'm not sure how much of an appetite there is for you know, some of these commercial stores to be coming in here when we already have a wide range of options available for our residents. And this complements the area already. I think it adds a lot of value. We're adding many, many jobs. It's a $50 million investment. Ward 9 and 10 only has 5% of all business in all of Brampton. So I think this is definitely something that can be positive, especially for our constituents. And so, as the chair of economic development as well, I really appreciate you coming there. I think this is a good opportunity, but I'd like to see what my fellow council colleagues have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Councillor Palaszczuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What exactly are you asking us here today to do? To support you in principle, or just to direct you, I guess, referral? I haven't heard a referral, but is this to send this back to staff for information to come forward?
No, I'm not asking for that. I am asking for you, let me say why I think I'm comfortable to make that suggestion to you. It's not as if this hasn't been through the eyes of folks already. It did through the minor variance process. I am asking for a different decision than a previous council made about that, but we're going to do it through rezoning and OPA, which was part of the concern. And so, no, we're looking for this committee and then ultimately council to say, in principle, we're content with the expansion of the auto mall onto these lands. We will make the application. We would like it is expedited an opportunity to have it brought back forward before you for final determination as can be made available through your staff. It is important, and understand if council hadn't appealed, this would be in place already, and they'd be building. It was a year ago we got approved by the committee, and then staff recommended to council to appeal. But they've been at it a year and a half. So the folks who manufacture those cars who want to get their dealers landed are tired of waiting, and so there needs to be a positive indication that this is likely to be permitted at the end of the day once the zoning application is formally in front of you.
So, if I was a new member of council, I would want the information that the past council had to determine, to make my eventual decision on the matter. So, I guess there is a new member on the board, but I don't know how we make a decision based on the fact that there's nothing before us on the city's side of it. At some point, I'm going to want to talk. It's not the area I represent, and I respect that. But it is a stone throw away from the area I represent. We have somewhat of some auto malls in our area, and I want to talk about the future of auto malls. With the manufacturers that are pushing these malls to take more cars, take more inventory, doesn't help us. More concrete, more asphalt isn't the answer for any of anywhere in Brampton. So, thinking outside the box is something that we need. Dealerships, when they're coming forward, they need to bring something to the table.
Yeah, and that's a fair comment. And I will say this, that on the inventory side, because of the kind of dealers that this client represents, they buy other sites to inventory their vehicles. Because they still have some inventory on site, but in large measure they are required, because they're often in urban settings, to find other locations to inventory the cars. So it will not be it really won't not be a sea of cars as many have become. This is not intended to be that. That's why they're looking at 3 on the site. And so the inventory of cars will have to be off-site for a chunk of them.
And currently what's there, it looks good. It looks good. It has a good feel in that area. So I like what's there. I don't want to change much of what's happening there. But I fully support Councillor Dillon's questions and comments. But again, I know the history of when the applicant was here before. So I'll reserve any further comments to maybe some of the new members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dillon?
Thank you. I would like to move forward with this, and based on what you've presented today, and what I feel like you're asking for is that we move forward in principle, but within the planning process as well. And I think I'd like to move that, we approve in principle, obviously go through the planning process, and I know you had mentioned July as a date there, and I'm wondering if that's something that you feel is appropriate.
Yeah, I think if there's going to be a meeting in July, that would be fine. If not, we'd prefer June. But if there's going to be a meeting in July, we'd be content with July.
Thank you. So Councillor Dillon, you have a motion.
I moved. So can we, Peter, do you need me to write that up for you?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, but before that can be introduced, Council's procedural bylaw is very clear that a delegation such as this, for which there's no staff report on the agenda, can only two things can be done with it: to either receive it and take no action, or to refer it back to staff for a report back. If committee wishes to do something else, it's going to have to waive its procedure bylaw, which is, the clerk does not recommend.
Right, so, with the chair, if we can.
So you'd like to move to waive the procedure by law?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor to move we need 2/3 to move the procedure by law. All in favor, please raise your hand so we can count. 1, 2. Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so before Councillor
Can you
Before
not
Councillor Dillon, so if we allow, I guess there's some questions and comments from members of committee. I will go to Councillor Vicente next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was about to ask exactly what the motion was. But before that, Mr. Davis, at the auto mall facilities that you currently have there now, what are the employment numbers presently, approximately?
We have nothing here yet. We're trying to be able to build something here yet. Are you talking generally in our dealerships?
These dealerships that are here?
Yeah, I will say, the application by Ford Colony on the lands immediately abutting us, there were numbers, and I can get you those numbers. And I think it was almost double the jobs created by this use as opposed to underlying industrial uses. And I think it was 127 on the Ford site. We're looking at closer to 300 jobs on our site.
And through you, Mr. Chair, if this moves ahead and moves forward, what are the potential job numbers that these sites combined could achieve?
It's probably in excess of 300 jobs on the two sites, and they're good jobs. I mean, if you look at the technical side of the business, the sales side of the business, the management side of the business, they're highly skilled and good-paying jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vicente. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. That's okay, I'm not on yet. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, my.
to delegate what's the urgency regarding this project?
Yes. So, as I said, they've been at this for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And it was roughly a year ago, the committee approved it, and then staff recommended council to appeal. The manufacturers are all in competition to find the key sites in the GTA to locate these dealerships. And if we're unable to step forward with this site quickly enough, they're going to insist either that my client find another site or someone else gets the use, gets that manufacturer. And so it truthfully is that important, quite frankly, to do this. And I really do think it's not a complicated exercise here. As I said, if council hadn't appealed, this was done. I mean, all the reports and everything else that were required to be put before the committee were put before the committee. So, and I do understand that this is different because that is a special policy area. And I'm just saying that the fundamental underpinning of that special policy area doesn't make sense anymore, given what's happened in the area. This is a better use for these lands, given what's happened around it. And we need to, I think, indicate to the manufacturers that we can get this done in an expeditious way.
Sure. And so my comments are going to stem around, the potential for the job implication regarding the urgency is why I will be supportive of waiving the procedural bylaws, because I know this area very well. I've knocked these doors numerous times. And one of the clear things in our wards is the lack of good jobs and employment lands. And it's a real issue for the community. So any potential to have and secure more employment, I will be supporting. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Dillon.
Thanks a lot. So I just want to make another comment as well that the lands to the south, I think is 40 acres owned by DG have been, I had a meeting with them as well, and they're looking for potential suitors for that land. And so, but there hasn't been anything. And so what this will do is help spur some even more interest in that area. I think that there's an entire block there. I think there's vacant lands down there for about 40 acres, 2 parcels. And so what this will also do is spur more interest. And as Councillor Singh had mentioned his point on jobs, and I think that's something that definitely him and I, again, to mention the lack of jobs in wards 9 and 10 are very interested in. And so I just wanted to make sure that I added that point as it's relevant to the conversation.
Councillor Willens.
Thank you. Yeah, through you, Chair. If we were to refer this to council next week to bring back the original report, because I'm supportive of this, but I'm not a big fan of waiving the procedural bylaws to get to grip. But would next week be enough time if we came back?
Yeah.
To bring the original report back?
Just a reminder, Councillor Willens, council is this Wednesday.
Oh, sorry, this Wednesday. This one. Oh, okay.
It's this Wednesday. Great. So if you
Would
want to
staff have
refer
enough
to the
time
next,
bring
it'll
the-
have to be in 2
Bring
weeks.
the original report back?
Yeah, I can bring it forward.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if I might just provide some clarification around the report. Beyond that, if you would allow staff to speak to the matter a little further as well, it would be appreciated. But with respect to the report, the only report that really is available really is the report that was created through the Committee of Adjustment Minor Variance application. So there is a staff report that spoke to the 4 planning tests associated with the Planning Act, associated with the minor variance application. But that report does not really cannot be considered in a formal way towards any rezoning official plan amendment associated with this application. So, we can bring that report forward for council committee to regard, but I don't see it as being an apples to apples here. The process that would have to be embarked upon with really a change, if not making a new application for minor variance, it would then be rezoning application and official plan amendment application. There's a process to be had there. So normal course is the property owner would make that application for those amendments, staff would process them. maybe just to speak to a little bit of the history quickly, if you don't mind. You know, it was more than a year ago that staff had met with the owner of the site, understanding the interest in developing the site for car dealership purpose. It was really at that time, perhaps a year and a half ago, that we had identified that the appropriate process here is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications, not the minor variance application. We had understood generally from the proponent that they would then proceed along with that process and would not proceed with a minor variance application, knowing just how particular the policy is here, how particular the zoning bylaw provisions are as well, and that it really couldn't meet the 4 tests. So notwithstanding that conversation, the minor variance application was made. It proceeded as it did, with ultimately it going to the tribunal with an appeal. But all this time has passed, and that official plan amendment application, zoning bylaw amendment application that we had asked the applicant to submit really appropriately a year and a half ago has never come forward. I can provide additional information if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Is that fine, Councillor Williams? Or do you have any further questions?
No.
Okay, Councillor, sorry, I had Councillor Williams on. Are you still on? No. Okay, you've come off. So I have Councillor Palashi now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there was never an original application filed?
Through you, Chair, there was a pre-consultation application only with respect to zoning bylaw official plan amendment type application. Staff had commented back, and so that application was made, I believe it was end of 2017. Staff responded just at the beginning of 2018, putting a clear letter back to the applicant there. Really from that point onward, I believe it was just shortly thereafter that the minor variance application came in, but there's been no OPA ZBA application that's been received.
Okay. So, but it would be a simple process to reactivate the whatever has been filed on record as of now, right?
So through you, Chair, there's been no application made for OPA ZBA. It was just a pre-consultation application, which is a separate application type itself. They could, the owners could, at this point in time, submit an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment application, having understood what we had put to them through that prior pre-consultation application. Within that response letter for the pre-consultation application, we had noted really the staff's response, response, our considerations as it relates to the policy, the provisions. We had noted what studies would have to be received with a full application for a ZBA OPA, but it would necessitate a full application coming in.
Which we are, I hope no one is taking from this that we're not going to submit those applications. We are. And I will say, in fairness, we had a meeting, and we know we're asking just for a fundamental decision in principle around the use. And we had a conversation with your acting commissioner. He's very kind to have the meeting to give us some idea of, what process we should go through to try and do something. And we got a response to that indicating that it was going to be difficult, quite frankly, for staff to be able to respond positively to our request within a timely way. And so that's why we're here, is that we know the divide. Staff feel a certain way about the application. Mr. Parsons is right. Part of it was process, whether it's a variance versus a OPA zoning bylaw amendment. And I understand why they would like us to do it the other way. But I will say, in terms of expanding all these other automotive uses everywhere else, and I know there's not a special policy area on those, I get it. But in terms of the expectation of what we put people through, it was a 30-day process to go and say, this is how we can answer the questions of why the use is appropriate. And we're gonna make sure we've got a rationale for, and I've given you a lot of the rationale tonight, quite frankly, as to why the underlying land use should be a permitted opportunity for these lands. And staff may continue to feel differently, that somehow It's a betrayal of a principle that is completely outdated, in my opinion, and has not proven out. I mean, the market, no one wants to sit on their lands for 7 years, and that's what's happened. There is, I don't think, any prospect of the other commercial uses, not wonderful commercial uses, a lot of them, is going to be taken up in any meaningful way quickly. So the reason I'm here, and I know it's unusual, is because there's an opportunity to actually create employment opportunities for folks in this city, have a significant spend on 3 buildings, create a tax revenue stream for this city that won't be here, quite frankly, if we don't indicate in some way that, yes, this council is prepared to entertain this use. And I'm not saying staff may not change their mind, but it wasn't, I would never say to Rick that this was the final decision of staff, because it was a conversation. And he came back kindly with an answer. But that's why I'm here.
Okay, from Rick, thank you.
Through you, Chair, if I could just respond to that, and thank you, Mr. Davis. I don't want to mislead or leave council with the feeling that staff are against this proposal. We, quite frankly, and it may have just been a communication issue, when I said that we wouldn't be able to give a favorable response within that time frame, that was intended to mean that, you know, we understood that you had commitments that you had to make, and based on the fact that we hadn't yet received the application with the supporting material, we didn't have time within which to make a decision. So I don't want you left with the impression that we are on the outset against the proposal. We just need time to evaluate the merits of the proposal with the supporting documentation. And so I just wanted to clarify that point.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess through you and to the delegate, I think kind of what you're hearing from this table is it's changed a little bit in the last 4 years. There are members that are no longer around this table that may not been in support of the application. I think you have a different group of councillors here that you know, support these type of jobs and understand, you know, areas like this, at least, you know, speaking as if this was in my area. I think, but that being said, I don't want to waive the rules of procedure for this. What I want to see happen is for this to be referred back to staff with the understanding that, you know, there is support on this side of the table, but for you to go through the process. And I know you're not here today trying to skirt around the process, but you know, the pre-consultation has been had. You're already that much further than a new application. So at least that's what I support. I don't support waiving the rules, but I support this going back to staff with, you know, some of the comments that have been made here around this table.
Thank you, Councillor Pelletier. Councillor Fortini.
Thank you. So staff, through the chair, if we go this route, how long will it take to get where he has to go?
Through you, Chair, it really does depend on when a full, complete application submission is made as per the Planning Act. So within the pre-consultation response letter that we had provided, it identifies a number of studies that would have to be provided. So when it is that the application is made by the applicant and those studies are all provided, we then formally deem it to be complete. Staff always intends to proceed very quickly then to public meeting. As we then hear from the public relating to their concerns and such, we'll then have a better understanding of really how we can proceed just thereafter as well.
Okay. So it won't be done by June, so we're saying? Sorry, it won't be done by June.
Through you, Chair, with an application being made, and if it was that a complete application was submitted, you know, before the end of the month, so let's say by May 1st, you know, we potentially could go forward to a public meeting come for June. But that would really have to require a complete application. Really, we would have to also look at the other applications that are currently with us that are already complete that we would have to proceed forward with as well, looking at some staff resource issues. But we would endeavor to proceed as quickly as possible, as we always do with once the application is complete.
Okay. So going back to procedure bylaws, and I understand I don't want to break them up, but, we look at development charges. We just had a report at the region. We don't have any development charges. We're way, way behind. When we got projects like this, and we're waiving them, or we're not accepting them, I don't see where all this construction is here in Brampton that we're waiving. So we look at the development charges, and the region saying we're way, way low. And this was going back from last year now, and we're not accepting good projects. This was already accepted last time, and then, of course, we went in camera, and whatever happened. It was done through the appeal, but I support the area councilors. This area here, I think, was created years ago, this area for the auto malls, to get the cars off of Queen Street, dealerships. If I'm not correct. Am I right, Al? Was this created, this whole auto mall was done years ago to get all this Queen Street, all the dealerships, and bring them to a certain area so we could develop Queen Street?
Through you, Chair, I believe that's correct, that the intent behind creating this auto mall here, the condominium in particular, just located on the west side of East Drive, there was some intent to really replace those that were on Queen Street, that's right.
So we have some good jobs coming here, lots of development charges coming in, great 3 dealerships, and we're worried about waiving the bylaws. And, we go to region, we just waived bylaws 2 weeks ago. So I'm in favor with the area councilors to support it and see what happens.
Thank you, Councilor Fortini. Councilor Vicente and Dillon, if you allow me, Councilor Williams hasn't spoken, so I will allow her to speak.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So I'm just looking for clarification. We waived the bylaw today, and we approved this in principle. Things could potentially get started in June, but we'll still need an application completed anyway. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. I think whether you decide to waive the procedural bylaw or not, the process will take the same length of time. I believe, and I don't mean to speak on behalf of Mr. Davis, but I believe what they're looking for now is assurance or commitment from council so that they can move forward with the deal with the dealership. So whether you decide to waive the procedural bylaw or refer it back to staff, at the moment we received the complete application for the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, the process will take the same amount of time. It will be a 4-month process regardless.
So regardless of whether we kind of break the rules to waive the bylaw, it's still going to take the same amount of time regardless. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
If I could just speak to that, and I agree with that. What I think the clients are looking for is sort of the fundamental principle of the underlying use, so they can say to the manufacturers that we're heading in the right direction, hang in with us. And if that's the advantage of doing something, to say that yes, expanding the auto mall and giving that opportunity to these lands is something that in principle that this committee and council could support.
Thank you, Councilor Vicente.
Mr. Chair. Councilor Paleshi is right in that this council is very interested in advancing the economic prospects of this city. And so when we have a delegation here looking to see for indication from this council on how we may make a decision many months from now after staff have gone through their process, I think that not only do we have an opportunity here to signal to this delegation that we want to see more business investment in Brampton, we are also sending a signal to the wider business community that we are open for business here, literally, and we need the investment in our city. I see an opportunity to deliver more jobs here at Brampton, I have confidence in the delegation and I have confidence in staff to ensure that the application meets all of our planning requirements and guidelines. But most importantly, I have confidence in the area councilors who have been on this file for longer than I have, and they seem willing not to break the bylaws, but to waive the procedural rules in this case. It's not to say that the next applicant that comes here and asks for us to waive the procedural rules, we're going to do that. But this has been a file that's been open for quite some time, and I get the sense that we would better serve the residents of this city if we move now and if we act quickly, because the opportunity is there. So I'm supportive, if the rest of council decides to do so, to move this forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente. To Councillor Dillon.
I'm gonna table the motion.
So before to table the motion, you
But
would
we
like,
need to waive, it's procedural.
so a motion
bylaws that we wanna
is on the floor
waive.
to waive the procedural bylaw.
No, I
To
wanted
cons-
for the motion that I wanted to
To
table.
consider the motion,
Through you, Mr. Chair, the motion would be to waive the procedural bylaw to allow committee to consider this matter.
And if I may add, there was a waiving of the procedural bylaw 2 weeks ago, which every regional councillor also voted in favor of.
sure. I appreciate that, Councillor Dillon. Essentially, members of the committee, as expressed by the city clerk, a recorded vote has been asked for. All in favor? Okay, we can use the buttons. Would you like to stand? Okay, so Councillor Fortini has asked that we stand in person. So all in favor, please rise to support the motion to waive procedural bylaw.
All in favor of waiving the procedure bylaw is Councillor Santos, Councillor Vicente, Councillor Willens, Chair Medeiros, Councillor Williams, Councillor Fortini, Councillors Singh and Dillon. Are you
Yeah,
standing in
I'll vote.
favor to waive the procedure bylaw? Councillor Singh, Councillor Dillon, all opposed. Please stand to be counted, showing it as opposed is Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Bowman. Mr. Chair,
Okay, thank you very much. And now we have the motion put forth by Councillor
I
Dillon.
didn't write it. Peter, did you write anything or not?
Essentially, if I'm not mistaken, you want the motion to reflect an approval in principle requiring the applicant to go through the planning process.
so through you, Mr. Chair, so the first part would be approval in principle for committee to express support for the development of the subject lands as part of the surrounding auto mall. The second part, I think probably needs some further clarification because I don't think staff, as we've heard, can process anything unless there's a complete application. And until such a complete application is filed, the city is at a loss to do something.
Could we add to that? Being the commissioner, that provided we submit the requisite material by May 1st.
May I suggest maybe to staff, would you like 5-minute recess to wordsmith, something that would be comfortable, or you do not require that time?
To you, Mr. Chair, that would be appreciated if we
Yeah,
can-
so it's now 8:34, so I will give 10 minutes, and we come back at 8:44 to consider this item. We will reconvene, so hopefully staff had an opportunity to meet with the delegation, and do we have a motion to speak to? Okay, so we have a motion on the board. Are there any questions or comments? No. Motion moved by Councillor Dillon. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. And can I motion to receive the delegation? Councillor Fortini. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Our next item, oh, no, that's already in consent. Oh, sorry, my apologies. So we have a staff presentation regarding driveway widening. Wait for the presentation.
Good to go? Okay. Thank you, Chair and members of council. I am here speaking with regard to the report, or in relation to the report that's also in this agenda regarding the residential driveways and widenings. This stems from a July 2018 council direction to undertake a review of the regulations related to driveways and consider potential for a permitting process. An update and work plan was presented in September 2018 to council, and then thereafter a multidisciplinary team from planning, building, enforcement, public works, and legal services was assembled. And I should also say strategic communications was also assembled to address and understand the issues and establish a recommended course of action. The team is here tonight, spread through the chamber, so they're here to assist with any questions that you may have subsequent to my presentation. So this evening, I just, as part of this, just want to briefly go through some of the main points within the report itself. These 7 items up here reflect the items outlined in the report. They relate to zoning bylaw requirements, options for surcharge for driveway widenings and charges through committee of adjustment, feasibility of charging contractors versus homeowners, i.e. licensees versus homeowners, how we deal with legal non-conforming status for changes to the zoning bylaw and the application of grandfathering to a number of scenarios, then policy for prioritization of complaints, which was previously generically referred to as vexatious complaints, and then how we're dealing with education and awareness, and then also feasibility of implementing a driveway permit process. So I'll be going through each of these items through the course of my presentation, and these, again, were the matters that were considered by the committee and are what we're reporting on this evening. So generally speaking, with regard to zoning bylaw requirements, we were mainly asked just to confirm what the existing requirements were. The report does indicate that. They're generally speaking, I don't have the table listed here, but it is in the report. Driveway sizes or widths are regulated based on the width of the lot itself, and then there is also a requirement for a permeable strip against the side lot lines. These requirements align with urban design objectives and engineering and design matters related to lot grading and subdivision. Council, this is a bit of an overview. Council has directed through the official plan that it's important to maintain attractive neighborhoods while balancing the need to accommodate parking, and the zoning bylaw requirements seek to implement that direction of the official plan. So with regard to zoning bylaws, in terms of recommended actions, at this time staff are recommending that the review, any sort of adjustments be undertaken through the city's comprehensive zoning bylaw review, which is currently underway, which is anticipated to be completed within the next 2 years. And that as part of that, could look at a number of matters, including establishing or assessing the need for minimum landscaping and maximum impermeable coverage requirements as part of that. So as part of this review that we have undertaken here, we have noted that there is a bit of a, in terms of the pure amount of hard surface allowed on a property, there's no strict requirement for that within the zoning bylaw, and that perhaps we ought to assess some sort of level of need to provide a minimum amount of impermeable or green landscaping on a property. So a bit of a gap was identified, and that can be something that we can deal with through this process. On to the second item that was looked at, which is the assess options for charging or doing a surcharge or doing a reduced fee through, say, a committee of adjustment, or what other charges could be applied to sites with regard to levels of impermeability and so forth. So the working group did not feel that an amendment to the applications fees for minor variances would be appropriate in either way. a reduction in an application fee may act as an incentive for more widenings to occur, and then an increase in fee, such as applying, saying that you have a surcharge for a widening, would then potentially also fetter the discretion of the committee and also staff, because you're giving a signal that, subject to paying the fee, there would be support for such a variance request. So the staff is not requested or recommending any changes to the fees. That the variance fees ought to be as per the standard practice. Everyone pays the same amount, and then they're assessed accordingly in context of the 4 tests of the Planning Act. I did want to note, however, there is a work underway by our Public Works and Engineering department regarding impervious lot coverage, and then potentially implementing a charge system as part of that. That report is anticipated for May, June 2019, and that will deal with some of the aspects of a property tax charge or some form of charge in that sense, based on the impervious cover and then the impacts that has on our stormwater systems and so forth, and relating the 2 elements. So, third item was in regard to the feasibility of charging contractors versus homeowners. So under the current legislative and policy framework, it is challenging to successfully charge contractors for doing work without a permit or simply just charging them. Often it's difficult to catch them. If you see something wrong as a bylaw enforcement officer, the only way to get to the contractor is through the homeowner, and a homeowner may not be ready to divulge that person's information and so forth. So often the only viable way of dealing with an enforcement matter is with the homeowner themselves. However, there are some things that we are recommending that may assist. First off it's the second bullet actually, is amending the business licensing bylaw to ensure that contractors have to get permits to widen driveways. That is in a sense related to a further recommendation of staff regarding a permitting system for driveways. Another aspect would be to require compliance with the zoning bylaw. The current licensing bylaw does not require compliance, that the licensees operate in compliance with the zoning bylaw. We are recommending that be added to it, so that be a further grounds for potentially revoking or not allowing a renewal of a license, and a further basis for charging a contractor. And then finally, there's an aspect of enhancing enforcement against contractors who are not complying with the bylaws themselves. And in this way, it would be just a matter more of, in particular, with a further recommendation of staff regarding a permitting system, that while bylaw enforcement officers are on their rounds and so forth, they're going to see another thing if they see a widening in progress or some driveway works in progress, that they proactively stop and then investigate that aspect of it as part of their work, and request to see the license or any other required permits that would be needed for the work that they're undertaking. So moving on, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the legal non-conforming status and application of grandfathering. So several aspects of this were reviewed. One was how the potential options to legal non-conforming status related to the zoning bylaw, how would legal non-conforming status would apply to potential changes to the bylaw, and then some discussion on grandfathering as it would apply to the driveway permit bylaw, and then also grandfathering with regard to the enforcement activity was held in abeyance since September 2018. So just to recap a little, as part of that direction or part of the work that was the presentation done in 2018, it was requested that the enforcement activity be held in abeyance until this work was done. And so there's recommendations with regard to how we proceed with that. So from a zoning bylaw standpoint, the legal non-conforming status applies to driveways that were built in accordance with the bylaw at the time of construction, but no longer comply as a result of changes to the zoning bylaw. So if they were once legal and now because of changes they're no longer complied, they're no longer completed, they're given a legal non-conforming status, so they can continue in a form as they were before. driveways that were constructed in contravention of the zoning bylaw and that are still in contravention, say a change were made, don't get afforded a legal non-conforming status. And that grandfathering doesn't apply to non-compliant driveways on the basis of time or length of period that the driveway had existed. So trying to apply a grandfathering principle based on, oh, this driveway has existed for 10 years is not an option that can be pursued from a legal or legislative perspective. So in this regard, the working group can't support application of grandfathering on the basis that it doesn't fit in the legislative framework by law enforcement, specifically the Planning Act. It's simply not an option. Statuses are accorded based on whether the situation existed or didn't exist based on the time the bylaw was in place, and not due to a council decision or some sort of other policy decision. The only way you can really change the legal non-conforming status or status in that sense is to change the regulations in the bylaw itself. So, and then with regard to in the enforcement requests that have been held in abeyance, the working group is recommending that the enforcement staff recommence with the enforcement requests that were held in abeyance since that time, and also based subsequent to the inaction of the complaint prioritization operating procedure, which I'll get to later. And that's simply put to ensure that there is consistency with how we deal with enforcement requests, that there is that it affords legitimacy to the zoning bylaw itself, that we are willing to enforce it and so forth. So those are important aspects of or reasons why we would want to continue with proceeding as we normally would on those. And I would, as the next item, quickly want to touch on the sort of the matter of policy for prioritization of complaints, just sort of a broader wording for the vexatious complaint policy. It wasn't specifically a piece of work undertaken by this group, but a number of this working team here are involved as a separate project in dealing with this matter. In general, what happens is that the city receives bulk complaints for entire neighborhoods or streets within the city. These can potentially be made by someone who have been a prior recipient to an enforcement action, or has just generally experienced frustration about what's going on in their neighborhoods. And they can often frustrate enforcement staffs because it impacts the resources and you have to respond to them. And if you get a number of them all at once, it eats up the capacity of city staff to deal with it. And then it also impacts on the ability to address with other matters, particularly if they're clearly seen as being vexatious in that sense. So in this regard, the working group or team that has been working on this has been concluded that we would be dealing with this through an internal administrative directive or an internal policy change, which would be implemented in April to establish procedures and criteria for dealing with these complaints. So the criteria would be set on the nature of the complaints or how many there has been and so forth, and based on that, there would be a process established to how to deal with those, and then you prioritize the ones that have a greater impact or seen as having a greater impact. So that is being enacted or implemented as an internal sort of measure. So the sixth point that we looked at was education and awareness, and just as an overview, the current methods for educating residents about maximum driveway widths really relate to warning clauses in subdivision agreements, clauses in the home buyers information maps, home buyers themselves on their own initiative contacting the zoning department, and then there's also information on the city's website. Some of the issues here are that traditional means of communication, such as the subdivisions agreement and so forth, do not seem to reach the owners of a resale home. It doesn't seem to be the best place to bring some of these issues to their attention, and that a more proactive approach needs to be taken in order to ensure that homeowners are aware of driveway regulations. I would also note that the list of licensed contractors for the city is not published either. So in terms of recommended actions, staff is recommending that we publish our list of licensed paving contractors so people can know who has been licensed with the city. And then as part of the driveway permitting process, should that be supported by council, is provide that information online through our public portal and we'd have to see if that can be undertaken from a technical perspective and then also legal in terms of the information we're allowed to release. But if it's a possibility to provide that information online so that people can see in their neighborhoods if someone has received a permit for a driveway installation, then we'll pursue that. Thirdly, we're coordinating with Strategic Communications to create a comprehensive awareness campaign, so to be more proactive and go through our multiple channels that we have available to us to raise awareness on just driveways and sort of the regulations related to them. And then finally, should council choose to proceed with a driveway permitting process, that we update the warnings in the subdivision agreements accordingly. And then finally, we were asked to look at the feasibility of implementing a driveway permitting process. Just as a note, other municipalities do have such a process, not a lot of them, but there are some. Toronto, Vaughan, Burlington are three that we found that are proceeding with or do have such a system in place. It was found that it would assist to a degree in the enforcement process, because the question the issue about the requirement would simply be a yes/no type thing. Do you have a permit or do you not have a permit? And that would be the basis for any sort of action. It wouldn't be about trying to measure the driveway and seeing, is it too wide, is it not too wide, and so forth. So it would simplify that aspect of it. And then just as a note, we do have an existing process in place for issuance and inspection of the curb cuts themselves. So I'm going to jump the screen and just talk a little bit more first. The recommended bylaw by staff is to implement a permitting process that would recommend permits or require permits for resurfacing, but not sealing driveways, construction, expansion, and alteration. The recommended effective date would be June 1st of this year. We are prepared to administratively bring everything up to speed to launch it for that date. From a fee perspective, it was discussed that we should keep the fee the same as for curb cut permits and just essentially adopt that process and expand it slightly. So there'd be a $50 application fee, and then leverage the existing process that we have to include driveway widenings. And then from a grandfathering perspective, just the permit process would not apply retroactively. So I just want to jump back quickly here. So it would only be required for work undertaken on or after the effective date of the bylaw. Where enforcement or prosecution action has already begun on an existing driveway, the owner would then not be subsequently required to obtain a permit. And where a driveway was constructed before the effective date, but the enforcement activity was undertaken after, again, a permit would not be required. So that is a bit of an overview of the contents of the report, and thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, staff are here.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fortini.
Thank you for the great job you've all done. But, you know, I want to defer this for May 13th, because this is very important. We have to get this right, because this is also affecting basement apartments, and we have to include that inside. So I want to like to go through. So I'd like to defer it for May 13th. To give us more time, make sure we get it right. So give us the next 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Okay, so I understand you're deferring this to May 13th, Councillor Fortini. So Councillor Palaszczuk and Councillor Vicente speaking to the deferral. Okay, so we have a deferral on the floor. All in favor of the deferral by Councillor Fortini? Sorry? Okay. Councillor Fortini, a member has asked if you'd like to hold it, or if you just want to hold the vote on the deferral. Would you like to hold it to allow them to make comments, or just? Okay, so you'd like to withdraw your deferral? Hold it. Okay, Councillor Palaszczuk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fortini. And I will, when the deferral, I think, when it comes back, I'll be in support of the deferral. But questions just to staff. On the permeable paver portion, so what I essentially would like to see is that if anyone was to expand their driveway with just permeable material, that they would not have to go through a permit process. walk me through that? With permeable pavers, and it doesn't have the impact that a hard road surface would have on our sewer system. We're getting the water back into the ground where it belongs.
Through the chair, I think just the concern would still be is that, so just in terms of being consistent through the process or through all the driveways, part of the regulation of doing a permit process to ensure that what's shown on the drawings is that people are agreeing to comply with the bylaw itself. So to exclude some portions, you can still, like a driveway that's done with just permeable can still be too wide based on the zoning bylaw. So that then creates sort of a two-tiered system that may be difficult to manage from an enforcement perspective. So I understand that, you know, it's seen as there's less of an impact, but part of this is also regulating to make sure that people are doing the work in compliance. So a permeable driveway could still be too wide. It could still impact, you know, by way of allowing too many cars to be parked in front of the building. So the intent of this process is to help deal with that matter. So.
But currently, and just Alan, before you, we have currently bylaw that you have to have so much frontage to driveway, right? So it wouldn't affect that portion of it. It would just affect the people that are allowed to do driveway extensions. If they use permeable pavers, they do not have to go through a permit process. That's kind of what I'm.
So through your chair, just for some clarification on Councillor Pleshy's point. Councillor Pleshy, you're meaning to say that, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but the expansion that would be occurring by way of a permeable technology, you know, as long as it's contained within the area that's allowed to be driveway and not widened beyond what the zoning bylaw requires, but you're asking for that work to not have to go through a permit process.
Right.
So, through you, Chair, really, staff had not contemplated waiving the permit process for that type of paving to occur with permeable technology and such. You know, that is an item that staff can look at.
So what I'm essentially trying to do is anybody that wants to widen their driveway that has the allowable space to widen it. So they're widening their driveway regardless. I'm trying to get them to use permeable pavers is what I'm trying to get them to.
Through you, Chair, if I might speak to it a little bit. There are two things that I'd like to say in regards to that suggestion. One is that we would, I think, have to come up with a pretty clear definition of what we would consider to be a permeable paver. There are varying opinions out there that interlock is permeable because of the nature of the construction, right? Yeah. So we would have to be pretty careful to provide a clear definition of what it is that we would accept as permeable. And the second thing, and just in support to what Alan Burney had said, the permit process is intended to provide consistency in the application of how we approach driveway construction across the city. Whether or not permeable or impermeable, are you getting too close to the property line? Are you too wide to allow more cars than we want to be parked in the front? Those things are still a consideration when that construction happens, regardless of the permeability of the material. So the permit process is intended to capture that aspect, like are you compliant in your proposal, so that down the road we're not knocking on your door saying, yeah, we recognize that you put an impermeable paver or a permeable paver in place, but it still doesn't comply with the zoning bylaw, so you have to take it up.
Okay.
So I would like to offer that for consideration, but we can certainly, if you wish, go back and take a look.
So I agree with what you had said, and I am the hint that this might be deferred for more time isn't saying that you're coming back with anything. So maybe a referral is a better course, but if I'm a homeowner that wants to expand my driveway, I want the city of Brampton to offer up something to move them in the direction of using a permeable paver surface, what the city deems the best, and not just the flower pots that they put and then move when you park your car. Because it has happened, I've seen it. So I like that kind of somewhat of an incentive to try and get people in that direction.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you when we come back in May, you would like some consideration in providing incentive to use permeable paving material.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Vicente?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions to staff. It says here in the report that driveway sizes are regulated based on the width of the lot and the requirement for permeable surface. It was always my impression that from a design aesthetic perspective, the driveway width would be equal to or thereabouts to the garage entranceway, and also with consideration to the curb cut that the city, through its construction of the streetscaping, allowed for that homeowner. Is that not the case? I mean, some lots can be quite wide, and therefore, depending on the numbers and the percentage, you could have an incredibly wide driveway. Should it not match the garage dimensions to a certain extent if aesthetics are important?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just in response to Councillor's questions, the zoning bylaw currently, and I appreciate that in the past, there was some effort to restrict driveway width to limit it to the width of the garage, period.
Okay.
But then there was a tendency to add a walkway. So the asphalt was still the width of the garage, but then walkways were being added on either side of that driveway, and then those walkways were being parked upon. And then when resurfacing happened, the walkways and the driveway were taken out, and it was leveled with an asphalt surface. So that's where we came from. And then in 2006, Council adopted an amendment right now where, regardless of whether you're calling it your asphalt driveway or your concrete walkway, the total hard and level surface that you're able to place on your lot is relative to the width of your lot. And it does cap out at a maximum. For most subdivisions, if you've got a 60 to 80 foot lot, you're looking at a maximum driveway width of 30 foot. And that's enough for 3 cars with a fairly decent sized walkway beside it. So it's not indefinite based on the width of your lot, and certainly out in the agricultural areas and in the residential estate areas, different rules apply. So then we're dealing with percentages of the front yard rather than an actual determined width. You'd be looking at a 30% of your front yard can be driveway. So that's where we are today, and it is an overall width dimension that includes any hard and level surface that's capable of being parked on by your vehicle.
Okay, so it's important for us to understand that the definition has changed over the years. Through you, Chair, my next question has to do with recommended actions, feasibility of charging contractors. It says here that we would want to enhance the enforcement against contractors who are not complying to the newly amended bylaws. How do you plan to enforce and to perhaps in a case where a contractor has not followed the rules and the regulations, what measures might we take then?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The intent of the enforcement action would be to pursue contractors primarily that are operating without a license. So it's a yes or no type of situation. The violation or the actual construction of the driveway could be the responsible of the homeowner and the contractor, the homeowner alone if the contractor can't be found. So there's some variables here that we'd be looking at, but primarily it's a matter of permits and licenses. So the contractor would have to be licensed, and the driveway construction would have to be constructed under a permit.
Thank you. So because I know that when we first brought this issue up I believe it was in December, there was a concern that homeowners were falling victim perhaps to unscrupulous contractors and then left paying the bill, or perhaps dealing with the consequences if a driveway ran very afoul of the rules. So what responsibility are we prepared to apply to the contractor versus the homeowner, or both?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the homeowner would be ultimately responsible for the work, pardon me, performed by their contractor. There would be, if the contractor did something contrary to permitted drawings or something along that nature, they have a 6.71 meter driveway, they pave it to 8 meters, that would be the responsibility of the contractor, and that'd be easy to determine. It's in the circumstances where we don't know who the contractor is, that the homeowner is going to be ultimately responsible. We think, or we believe, that we should be able to track down most of these contractors. There are a lot of fly-by-night contractors out of there. There's nothing that prohibits you from getting all of your friends together on a Saturday, decide you're going to interlock your driveway. You're not having a licensed contractor to do that work, in which case the homeowner is going to be responsible.
My thinking in response to that is that I, as a homeowner, go onto the city website, read all the rules, and find a list of contractors who have complied or are part of the permit system, and then for some reason the rules are not followed, and then I'm responsible, clearly, but then what responsibility would the contractor have, given that they had the faith and confidence of the city, implied through our endorsement on the website?
Through the chair, I think that might be a question for legal.
Well,
she's laughing.
So, since we are deferring, I think it's something to think about. And my final question, thank you, Paul, would have to do with the vexatious complaints. To what degree are bylaw officers proactively looking for, searching for driveways that do not comply with the rules as they stand today?
Through the chair, we do not proactively target driveways. Proactive complaints for driveways will occur if we're called to a particular property in the adjacent driveway. There may be a matter where two driveways have been attached. The 0.6 meter setback is not being met. They've, together created a large paving surface. That would be a matter where we would proactively address, create a complaint for the adjacent property and address that as well.
Through you, Chair, because during the election, we certainly heard loud and clear from many residents that they felt that the laws were being applied evenly. For example, a bylaw officer appears at a property, their property is not found to be in compliance. Meanwhile, across the streets, within plain sight of both individuals, there are more infractions to be found, but the officer is only there to deal with that property that perhaps received a complaint. And so when you talk about bulk complainants submitting entire neighborhoods because perhaps they may have been frustrated in the past in dealing with the city, I think it's something for us to consider that one of the reasons why that is happening is because they don't see the law being applied evenly and equally to all members of that community. So I think that speaks very loudly and clear that we may want to look at whether or not we do proactive work when it comes to the enforcement of our bylaws. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente, and I think staff heard you loud and clearly that this is an issue that we should take in mind. Yes. So thank you very much. I now call on, before Councillor Fortini, who I assume wants to move his deferral, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Bowman is on the board. He hasn't spoken. Allow him to speak his mind.
Loud and clear. No, this is just a question through you, Mr. Chair, of clarification to Councillor Fortini. What's the significance of moving it to May 13th? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think just before, I think Councillor would like to do more due diligence on gathering information, and May 13th, there's no significance for that date per se, but it gives you a month to look for information.
Oh, okay, I thought I heard Councillor Fortini say there was something else happening May 13th that is going to tie into this.
No.
No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Dillon. Okay, you spoke once, so now there's no question to be called, as Councillor Fortini is next, and so, yeah, he has a deferral. Yeah, Councillor Fortini.
For May 13th.
Okay, so we have a deferral for May 13th. All in favor? Okay, Councillor Palucci.
I just wanted to know through you, Mr. Chair, if members' comments are going to be captured when they come back in May 13th, because
So
that's not the direction of the deferral.
I think we would take advisement. Staff are always open to suggestions and comments. So I would suggest this, members of committee, if you have any additional comments or questions regarding this item before May 13th, please send to our staff who are always available to consider anything moved by councillors and questions or comments. So thank you, Councillor Palucci, for reinforcing that. So we have Mr. Patari, is that correct?
To the chair, correct.
Okay, so members of committee, please provide your comments and questions to our planning and development staff. Does that satisfy, or would you like to see?
And then the report coming, there'll be a further report coming back then?
Through the chair, that would be correct. We would need to modify and enhance the report based on the discussion this evening and any additional direction and comments provided by council to ensure that we've addressed those in the report back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So a motion to defer to May 13th. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Our next order of business is, in fact, councillor question period. Are there any questions by members of committee? No. Now we go on to public question period. Are there folks in the audience? Okay, no. A motion to adjourn. Our next meeting is April 29th at 1 p.m. Moved by Councillor Williams. All in favor? Have yourselves a good night. Thank you.